Okay, so in this video, we're going to be talking about storytelling. Now, storytelling is obviously the most crucial part of the editing process. In fact, it's the most important part of filmmaking. It's the whole point when we're making films and we're editing them. The whole point is to tell a story. And so this is a really important video. Now, at this point, we've already used the Bob Ross method to move our clips into the timeline. So from the clips timeline into the main timeline. And some of you might be wondering, well, when I'm doing that, how do I know where to place my clips? How do I know what clip to start with, or where to cut them, or how to refine them? Because once you've got the broad strokes in, then you start having to go in for the details and you start really editing together and pulling out the story out of your clips. And this is what we're going to kind of go into today, is how you format those clips, different ways that you can format them, how to get them in the right place so that you're telling that story. Because ultimately, everything that you do as an editor should be guided by the story. So when you get footage back from the filmmakers, or if you're the filmmaker, when you get your footage back into your computer, you've gone out and you shot your stories, you shot the, all the footage. Now as an editor, your job is to bring that all together into a cohesive story, something that makes sense as the viewer watches through it, okay? And every part of the editing process affects that story. So the editing, the sound design, the color grading, every part. For example, with edits, faster edits will be more intense, more action-packed for like maybe an action movie or a sports scene or a sports commercial or something like that. Whereas slower edits might feel more elegant, more slow, more meaningful, more thoughtful, depending on what you're working on there. Color grading, same thing, like cooler tones are going to feel more serious and more blue, whereas warmer tones might feel more vibrant and more exciting. And so all of the decisions that you're making as an editor should be guided by that story. What's the story you're trying to tell? What's the mood or tone of the piece that you're trying to create? And you should be making decisions in your edit based off of that. Okay, so in this video, I'm going to jump into Premiere here and I'm going to show you a couple of commercial films that I've shot. And we're really going to talk through the short film or commercial film editing process. Now, a lot of these techniques apply to feature films as well. In fact, I personally believe that shooting short form content and editing short form content is the absolute best way to learn storytelling for a beginner. A lot of the techniques and strategies that you are required to learn, like for example, when you're shooting short form, you're forced to really only focus on the most important parts, get rid of the fat, get down to the meat, cut quickly through things. You don't have a lot of time to work with, so you can't, spend a lot of time in certain places. You got to keep things moving. You got to keep things entertaining. All of these are really good techniques to learn as an editor in short form content so that you can then take them and move into feature films if that's what you decide to do. There's a reason why a lot of the feature film makers out there and professional DPs and directors started out shooting commercials or music videos or other short form content, because it's like a training ground for learning storytelling. So we're going to talk about storytelling in this video in the context of commercial films, which is probably what most of you are shooting right now. And then you can take these same techniques and apply them to whatever else you're shooting. Okay, so we're going to cover two different formats of storytelling and ways of editing together your footage in order to tell a story. And the first one is a more chronological or hard narrative storytelling format. So I've got a project here in Premiere opened up, and this is a commercial that I shot about 5 years ago for a luxury ski hotel in Park City, Utah, the Stein Eriksen Lodge. And in this video, you'll see here that this was very much a chronological story. So a chronological or hard narrative is what I call it. So basically in this story, it's for a hotel. So we told the story of a couple arriving at the hotel. So you can see them driving in the car. They're driving, they're in the car together, they arrive at the hotel, the valet opens the door, they get out of the door, they go in, they get in the hot tub, then they go from the hot tub to the fireplace, and then they're enjoying their time, going through everything, doing a wine tasting, and then it goes through the entire thing until the very end, their last night, they're hanging out at the hotel, and then it ends, with the glamour shot of the hotel, okay? It's a very chronological, very hard narrative sort of format for the video. Now, this is similar to movies. Movies will be shot this way. So when it comes to movies, typically the whole goal within each scene in a movie is continuity, right? You want it to be continuous. So at the end of one clip, as the actor starts turning, and then you cut to another clip, that turning motion continues, right? There's like, they have people on set that are in charge of just making sure that things are continuous. And so you can see some of that in this in this film as well. So for example, when the valet reaches for the door here, he pulls on the door and then it cuts to another clip and then you see the door opening. So that is a continuous cut, right? And so when you're doing more chronological storytelling in your edits, you're going to be using some continuous cuts. Okay, those continuous cuts are moving from the same action, showing the same action from two different angles, but these are actually two separate takes. I'm taking those two takes and putting them together as an editor so that it feels like a continuous motion. Now, I don't want you to feel like you have to do this all the time. And in fact, this is where the short form part of this comes in. When it comes to cinematic commercials and short form content, often this is not what you're going to be doing because you don't have time in a 60-second piece to show the entire action of every scene. And this is where your judgment comes in as an editor. So for example, if we look at this cut, you'll notice that the door is opening here by the valet, and then there's a cut to the wife getting out of the car, okay? We didn't see the door opening all the way. In fact, the valet was opening the door for the husband, not the wife. But we didn't see the door opening all the way. We didn't see her, turning in her seat, getting out of the car. What we're doing is we're jumping to just the moments that we need to tell the story. And this is called cutting through time, okay? Especially in short form commercial storytelling, and again, this translates to feature films as well, you're going to do a lot of what's called cutting through time. Okay, that's where you're cutting out the moments or the pieces of the story that are just not important for telling the story. So I really didn't need in this moment to show the door opening all the way. We get the concept when we see the valet just starting to open the door. As soon as he starts to open the door, the viewer understands that, okay, the door is opening. Now we don't need to show any more of that, okay? He starts to open the door and then we cut. But we don't cut to the door finishing opening. We don't cut to, the guy getting out. We're cutting through time. Now we're cutting to the wife getting out of the car. And then as she's getting out of the car, now we cut to, obviously the hot tub scene. This is cutting between scenes. That's a totally different thing. Like feature films will do that too, right? You cut to a new scene. But even within specific scenes, you'll notice that we are cutting through time, okay? Now this is going to be a common theme throughout this is finding the moments that you need, okay? What is the moment that I need? In this clip of her getting out of the car, we've got her slightly standing up, smiling at the valet, and just about to walk away, okay? If this clip were extended, so we see her go all the way off the screen, it would feel too long, okay? It would feel like a lapse in the story, okay? There's kind of like a pause there. We don't need that. We'll show you a little bit more of this in the next example. Or if it were to cut earlier, so let's say this clip were extended and we show her coming into frame. Again, it's gonna feel too long. So we're starting where the movement is already happening. She's already moving is when we start the clip, and when we end the clip, she's still moving. And the action of the clip is already going at the beginning of the clip and is still going at the end of the clip. So pay attention to that as you're cutting through these things. Now you'll notice going through this commercial as we're telling the story, we don't have lots of like creative edits or crazy transitions or anything like that. And when it comes to storytelling, those creative edits and the transitions and the speed ramps and all those kind of things that are kind of trendy right now and that a lot of people like to do, those are really exciting. They're trendy. They're cool. But when it comes to telling a story, again, everything you do needs to be in service of the story. So if those speed ramp transitions or any of those types of transitions that work typically very well for travel videos or, those kind of videos, if they're working to serve the story, if they're working to tell that story, then go ahead and use them. That's awesome. If it's creating an emotion, if it's creating some sort of excitement that's going to get the viewer more interested in the video, that's great. But for a commercial like this, you'll notice that all of these transitions are just cuts, okay? Just plain old jump cuts put in the right place to tell a story, cutting through time, showing things happen, okay? And the reason we do this is because with the fancy transitions, you're drawing a lot of attention to the edit. And for this type of story, I want the edit to be invisible, okay? The best editing is invisible. It's editing that you can't feel. So as the viewer's going through this, they don't feel every single cut. They just feel a story flowing. And that's the important part. Okay. It's just making sure that you don't always want to draw attention to the edit, because every bit of attention that you draw towards the edit is taken away from the story. So if the focus and the emphasis is on the story, then your editing should be invisible, right? So that's an example of a chronological or a hard narrative piece. Now, let me jump in here and show you another example of a different type of format. And this is actually the more common format that I use in most of my commercial storytelling. And this is a short story format, okay? This is not going to move as chronologically as the other one. So the way a short story format works, and we're going to kind of dig into this edit and show you exactly how I did it and why I did it this way. The way a short story format works is it's based on the most basic principle of storytelling, and that is beginning, middle, and end. Every good story has a beginning, middle, and end. At its most basic, that's all it is. Now you can get more in depth into that. Of course, there's more that goes into that, but at its most basic form, a story. And most feature films that you watch, in fact, pretty much all of them, will have 3 acts. They've got the beginning, act 1, act 2, act 3, beginning, middle, and end. And I want you to think about that when you're going into your edits and take the same approach. How can you approach your entire story from a beginning, middle, and end standpoint? Now, this goes for the entire edit. So for example, we've got a beginning here in the first part. We've got a middle here in our entire edit, and then we've got an ending here of our entire edit, okay? So the entire edit has a flow, okay? It transitions from beginning, middle to end. So for example, you might have here at the beginning where maybe the music is a little bit slower. You've got things that are happening on screen that are just kind of setting up the story. And then when the music starts to pick up, you're showing kind of more of the meat of the story, what's really happening, what we're really getting at with the commercial. And at the end, you have maybe the climax or where things start to come down and you're starting to kind of drive the point home, okay? That's kind of your beginning, middle, and end. Now, that happens throughout the entire edit. But then the beginning, middle, and end also, the 3 acts also happen within each of the stories in the commercial. So the way a short story format works is that you have multiple individual stories that are happening at the same time, okay, throughout the edit. Now, in the Stein video that I showed you, it was one story, right? We have one story of the couple. They're moving through time. They are experiencing their time at the hotel together. Now, this one's a little bit different, and often this is the way that I'm going with my commercials. So when I talk to the client before working on a commercial like this, the conversation always revolves around what are the demographics that we want to target in this video. And since this is for a multi-level marketing company, their target demographic was the distributors. And they identified 3 different demographics of distributors. We had the young millennials, we have the single, not necessarily single, but the younger power moms, and then you had the older couples, okay? Those are the 3 demographics that they're working with. And so we decided that in this commercial, within this 60-second commercial, we were going to show those 3 demographics. We're going to write a story for each demographic. So I've got them all split out here so that you can see it. So on this first track in pink, we've got one story. On this second track in green, we've got another story. And on the third track in purple, we've got another story. And notice that all of the stories are happening simultaneously. So let me go through and just show you this, because this is the way the short story format works, is that it's not just one story that continues throughout the piece. It's multiple stories that we're cutting back and forth, and you're progressing them slowly together simultaneously. All right. So the way this works, for example, I'm going to show you these 3 stories that are happening in this. So I'm just going to hide these other 2. And we'll take a look at this first pink one. So at the bottom, we've got the story about a dad. He's working, doing a Facebook Live at the beach. Okay, he's standing there. He's sitting in the sand. He's working while his wife and his kid are playing in the background. Then he's still working. His kid comes up and says, "Hey, Dad, come play with me." He gets up and starts playing with his kids. And then for the rest of it, now they're actually spending family time together. Okay, did you see the beginning, middle, and end? So beginning, Dad is working at the beach. Middle, son comes up to Dad and says, "Hey, I want to play with you." End, Dad plays with his family. Very simple story. Very simplistic, nothing too complicated, but that's the one story for that one. Okay. Now let's go into the next one, this green one here. Okay. This is the millennial demographic. Okay. So we've got some millennials, younger kids having a party on a rooftop. Okay. So girl enters the party and greets her friends, still greeting her friends. Then she's talking to her friends. They're hanging out, having a good time. Then she realizes that somebody isn't there who's supposed to be there, and she goes and gives her a call on FaceTime. Okay. Then once she's talked to her on FaceTime, she brings her back over here and lets her see everybody else. And then they all hang out with her over FaceTime or over Zoom. Okay. In this case, it was Zoom. All right. So that is that story. Notice beginning, middle, and end. Beginning, girl arrives at party and greets her friends. Middle, she realizes that one of her friends isn't there and goes and talks to her. And she brings the Zoom call back to the party and lets her be a part of the party. Okay. Beginning, middle, end. One more here. We've got the last one here is we've got a mom working at home by herself. She is working with her organization here, texting them, talking to a couple of members of her organization saying, hey, we should meet up. Her daughter comes in and says, hey, it's time for me to go to school. Mom gets up, takes her daughter to school. Then she meets up with her friends and they all go out to coffee together and enjoy some time together while she's showing them some things on her phone. Okay. Again, beginning, middle, end. I'm saying the same things over and over again. We've got mom working from home, talking to her friends. Daughter comes in. She takes her to school. Then she goes out with her friends. Okay. So notice that we have a beginning, middle, and end. We have stories happening simultaneously, these different demographics, and we're cutting between them. So in the commercial, if I hide everything, now we start with one of the stories. And this is typically the way it goes. And if you look at commercial films across the board, you will see this over and over and over again, this format that goes like this. So you start with, your first scene. You start with a wide shot, a landscape shot that kind of sets the scene. We go into that scene, and of this story, we just use a couple clips, 2, maybe 3 clips. In fact, there's never a moment in this entire video that I use more than 3 clips in succession of the same story. Okay. So 2, maybe 3 clips of that scene, and then that's it. Boom. So we just chop off the very beginning of that story. Then we go on to the next one. Then we show the beginning of this story. Okay. Boom. 2 clips. Then on to the next one, we show the beginning of this story. 2 clips. Boom. Now we've just set up all of these 3 different stories. Now we move into, what are we doing here? Now we're going back to the first one. Okay. Progressing that story a little bit further. Now it doesn't have to be so 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 all the time. Notice that we go back to the first story here. We're progressing that a little bit further. And then we're going to the third story again. Okay. So this is where you as an editor, you get to kind of put your judgment in there and decide where things should go. And then from there, it's 1 clip of that and then 1 clip back at the second story here. Okay. And then first one, third one, first one, second one, third one, second one. I'm getting confused on which one's which. That's how we progress the edit throughout the video and tell this story. Okay. So now, kind of in general, when you're moving your clips into your timeline using, the Bob Ross method, you're moving your clips in, you're putting in the broad strokes. You can be thinking about this. Well, which story do I want to start with? Where do I want to begin the story? How do I want to set up this entire edit? And then how can I move through these? So you're figuring that out. Now, when you get in a little bit closer, a little bit more granular, now a question that I get all the time is, well, which clip should I start with? Should I start with a landscape shot like this? Should I start with close up? Where do I start within this scene? And a good general rule of thumb, probably the easiest way to look at this, the easiest format for doing this is just to, if you don't know anything else, just go wide, medium, close up. Okay. Wide, medium, close up, wide, medium, close up. It works really, really well. And it's a really easy formula to follow every single time. So for example, this one starts with the wide. We have the wide landscape shot. This is showing us the location. This is where we're at. Okay. From there, we're going into a medium shot showing the entire group. Okay. We've got the main girl here in the front, all of her friends in the background. And then we go in for more of a close up of her just giving a hug to one of her friends. Now, notice what we're doing here as well. Since this is a concept that we already talked about, showing the bare minimum and cutting through time. So notice that as she moves in for the hug here, we're not showing the entire movement going in for the hug. We're just going from, okay, she's starting to go in for a hug, and then we're jumping to the hug. All right. This is what helps keep things moving in a commercial. This is what helps keep things flowing, because in commercials, you only have 60 seconds. You've got to keep people's attention, right? And so that's what's going to help you there. Now, if I were to adjust these clips, I'm going to do a quick adjustment here, which will show you kind of what this looks like if you do it wrong. If I were to adjust these clips so that this first clip actually goes all the way until she hugs him. So let me find that moment. Then we're going to get an edit right there. Okay, so there's our edit. This is kind of tricky because this is actually the same clip. So I took the same clip and I actually just cut out the middle of it. And because the camera's moving, it works. If the camera wasn't moving, then everybody in the scene would just jump and it would look weird. But it kind of feels like two different shots because I'm kind of moving in with them. So for example, if I were to play this, you can kind of feel how this feels. Okay, notice how the cut, so we're cutting through time still, right? She's just starting to hug him, and then now she's in like full embrace, right? We're still cutting through time, but we're not cutting through enough time. So this is something you have to consider when you're cutting through time, is there's kind of a happy medium there. You want to make sure that you are not cutting exactly to the clip, which would, in this case, would look exactly like this. That would be a continuous edit, okay? Which means that you're not cutting out anything, which means that you're not getting the advantage of moving through things faster. But you want to make sure that the amount of time that you're cutting through is significant enough for there to be a change in composition, a change in movement, so that it doesn't feel like it just jumped. So for example, in this clip, it just kind of feels like a jump, which feels unnatural, and again, is taking away from the story, and you can really start to feel that edit. So instead, we have it set this way, where we've taken out more of that middle. We see her just barely starting to lift her arms for the hug, and then we cut directly to the hug. Because we're cutting through enough time, it doesn't feel unnatural, okay? It just feels like things are moving right along. All right. Again, we talked about showing the bare minimum. So if I were to take this clip, for example, and let's say I started it right here. Notice how the beginning of the clip, just the action of the clip of her entering the scene, just hasn't really started yet. It's kind of, you know, as a viewer, we're just kind of like waiting for the action in that clip to start. This is where you really want to learn how to cut out the fat and really get down to the meat of the clip. We want to get to the point right here where she's kind of walking slowly at first. And then right at this point, right where I put the edit, is where she starts to pick up her pace. That's where we want to start the clip. You want to start your clips with the action, or with the action already started. Okay, the action begins before your clip begins. That's going to help things keep moving again. So she's already moving, and again, we're cutting it right there. Now, same thing on the back end of this. Okay, let me just get rid of this thing here. On the back end of this, if we were to let this clip play out too long, at some point, it just gets a little bit awkward, right? Because now the talent is like, okay, well, we did the action, now what? And you can start to sense that. So pay attention to those types of things and really think about, well, at this point, you know, she starts pulling away from the hug. The moment she starts pulling away from the hug, I don't need to show this clip anymore. The story's there. The viewer knows what's going on. They hugged each other, okay? Boom, done. We don't need to show anything else, okay? So when you're editing through these stories, make sure you're getting down to the meat of it. You're getting down to the bare minimum, the essentials. Only what you need, the minimum that you need to tell that story, and then move on. Move on to the next thing, okay? This requires you to cut out a lot of footage that you shot, but that's okay. Just like in the pacing video, we want to get down to just the very best footage, okay? Okay, so we talked about that. Let's go back to talking about order of clips. So the best format, or the easiest formula for doing this, is basically just to go wide, medium, close-up, right? Which is what we're doing here. We've got a wide shot, a medium, and a close-up. However, you don't always have to do that. So for example, you know, here's a medium and then a close-up, okay, on his feet in the sand. Here's kind of a medium, but it's, you know, it's a medium angle, but it's kind of, I would call it a close-up just because the focus is on her hand, right? So this is an example where we actually started focused in on the action, a close-up on the action, and then backed up to a medium to show what was going on. And we don't show a wide of this scene until this shot, okay? So while wide, medium, close-up is the easiest formula to follow, and if you, like I said, if you don't know anything else, like just do that. That'll solve it for you, right? You can get a little bit more creative by starting with the close-up. Now, when you start with the close-up, it has a different feel to it, okay? With a wide, when you start with the wide, the emphasis is being placed on the environment, the location, the overall what is happening, who is where and why are they there. That's what you're focusing on with the wide. With the close-up, we're focused more on the action. So for example, in this scene, the focus is on this amazing location with lights strung up, and we've got, a sunset in the background, and it's just incredible. And so we're focusing on the fact that there's a party happening, okay? There's a party happening on a rooftop, that kind of thing. And then we're going in and say, well, here's what's happening at the party. So once upon a time, there was a party at sunset, and then this thing happened. Two friends hugged. There's our story, right? Now, this works very well for the beginning of a commercial because you need to set up something so people know what's going on. Once you get into it, though, now with this story, we're working a little bit differently, okay? In the meantime, there was a mom at home using her computer, okay? And, I'm talking in kind of storytelling terms, right? Here, we're focusing on the action. We jump into, oh, there's some curiosity here. Like, what is happening? What is the mom doing? What is this hand doing with the mouse? We're jumping into the action. We're putting the emphasis on what's happening in the action, and then taking a step back and showing like, oh, okay, it's a mom. I get that. And now, okay, it's a mom at home in her office, right? So while I said that the easiest format is wide, medium, close-up, you can also do the reverse, and it just gives you a totally different feel. This is what I was talking about when I explained how every part of the editing process affects your story. And this is how you use editing to change that story. So when you're going in and you're editing your commercials here, when you're editing your videos, be thinking about all of these concepts. Be thinking about the beginning, middle, and end. So when you go through, you're thinking about, well, okay, how am I going to establish this part of the story? All right, let's move on to the next scene. How am I going to establish this part of the story? And then start cutting through it and cutting back and forth between these different stories and progressing all of them simultaneously. This is how you create a story that is cohesive, not only within each clip and each scene, but also cohesive as a whole, as an entire piece. And again, all of these techniques that I'm talking about are not just for short form content, not just for a 60-second commercial, but the same concepts apply to feature films or short films or whatever it is, the type of story or video that you're editing. Sometimes it might not be a human subject. Maybe you're shooting real estate videos and the subject is the house. What is the story you're telling about the house? Wedding videos would be the same thing. You're telling that story. Music videos, exact same thing. Music videos often use this format where they're cutting between different stories. In time, go watch music videos. You'll see this all over the place, where we're cutting between the different stories. We're progressing each of those stories at the same time. So there you go. There's a quick primer on using storytelling in editing a commercial film. Again, like I said, storytelling is the most important part. When it comes to filmmaking and editing, that's the entire point. The point is to tell a story, is to take the viewer on a journey. And hopefully these tips have been helpful in helping you to think about how to format that, how to put your clips on the timeline, how to organize them, and start to polish that edit in a way that feels natural and that keeps the viewer going on the journey with your talent inside of that story.